guys, it's Bunnymon and welcome to today's video and welcome to another WWE reaction. For today, I will be reacting to a video by Wrestle with Andy and it's called The Invasion Story WWF versus the Alliance Full Storyline Documentary. I heard some of you mention this and I have no idea what you were talking about, so this would be the best time for me to inform myself. So let's go and react to this video, shall we?
There may be no greater case of a missed opportunity in wrestling history than with the invasion angle. Yes, for fans, it was the ultimate dream scenario. Take the two biggest companies in North America and finally have them collide with each other to see who ultimately was the best. On top of that, for people inside the industry, it was the all-time payday opportunity. After all, who wouldn't want to pay to come see the top stars of WWE finally take on the top stars of WCW? And then when you ended up throwing a spanner into the works in terms of the Renegade No. 3 promotion ECW, who began circling around the whole thing at a certain point, threatening to take things to another level of extreme altogether and ruining the party for both companies. The possibilities seemed endless. That's why, when it finally happened and the fans got what they got, pretty much everyone was left disappointed. It should have been the best storyline in wrestling history, but in some ways, it ended up turning out to be one of the worst instead. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into the whole story from start to finish in WWF versus the Alliance, The Invasion Story. Before we talk about the invasion itself, let us backtrack a little and give some context for those who weren't around at the time. You see, back in the late 80s and 90s, there were two big names when it came to pro wrestling in North America: Vince McMahon's sports entertainment spectacle WWE, and Ted Turner's Southern wrestling promotion WCW. And while both were most certainly in direct competition with one another, up until the middle of the latter decade, it were WWE who were the clear number one, with superstars like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, and the Ultimate Warrior all making their names there.
I love them.
That said, however, once the steroid trial hit and McMahon was forced to drop a lot of his older, more muscle-bound stars, WCW were only too happy to pick them up and give them a new home under promises of big money contracts. And in the end, it was this, combined with the groundbreaking NWO angle, which saw them manage to overtake their northern competitors for a period starting in 1996, becoming the #1 wrestling promotion in the world during that time, as they were able to start the fires of the upcoming boom period. Responding to this then, WWE would develop a whole new roster of stars, this marking the beginning of the Attitude Era, as now, with the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Triple H on their television, they managed to turn the Monday Night Wars into a two-horse race once more, giving fans the excitement of being able to flick between Raw and Nitro live every week, watching all the top guys and pondering over what it might be like if one day they were able to collide with each other. Come 1999, though, mismanagement and poor booking within WCW had led to that company beginning its dramatic fall, one that would eventually climax with them going out of business only a year later, to be bought out for pennies on the dollar by McMahon himself, with this formally marking the end of the war and leaving WWE the victor. Of course, this had the knock-on effect of pretty quickly taking much of the excitement out of wrestling, as now, with no competition left to fight, it was feared by many that the urgency which had driven WWE to become so good during this period would wither away. And this was made even more of a concern when ECW, the renegade third brand of American wrestling which had directly inspired the Attitude Era and basically acted as the punk movement to the two bigger promotions' pop and glam rock chart dominations, went bust around the same time. Luckily, though, this potential fan malaise wasn't allowed to fester for long, because on the March 26, 2001 episode of Raw, Shane McMahon would shock the wrestling world when he appeared on the last ever episode of Nitro to announce that, in storyline, he, and not his father, had purchased WCW, and that going forward, he would be reviving the brand in his own image as they once again challenged WWE for ultimate dominance. Yes, finally, now, with everyone working under the same umbrella, fans were going to get to see WWE versus WCW. And of course, with this news, instantly, everyone began speculating on the whole host of dream matches that this would inevitably lead to. Steve Austin versus Goldberg, Sting versus The Undertaker, the NWO versus D-Generation X.
That sounds
the
exciting.
Possibilities seemed limitless. And as the months followed and fans eagerly waited for Shane to make his move and invade his father's promotion, excitement reached a fever pitch. What they didn't know, however, was that, as they were waiting, WWE were trying to get a separate TV deal for their new acquisition, hoping to run it as a completely different promotion on a different channel like it had done before. Yes, it's crazy to think now, but had the McMahons been successful in this early idea, we may have never gotten the invasion at all. Luckily then, or unluckily, depending on how you look at it, they weren't successful with this, as TV companies by and large just found the WCW brand to be too worthless at that point. And so, with this in mind, WWE would return to the idea of staging the most ambitious storyline they'd ever done, the one every fan had really wanted to see in the first place. That was how, on the March 28th episode of Raw, WCW star Lance Storm would fire the first shot in the war when he performed a run-in during a match, this causing the live crowd to explode as they realized it was finally on. And sure, in hindsight, it may have felt like a weird decision to have Storm be the first guy show up and not somebody bigger like Hollywood Hogan or Ric Flair, but at the time, it didn't matter. It was WWE versus WCW. Then, when Hugh Morris attacked Edge the next week, and this was subsequently followed up by Booker T showing up at the King of the Ring, fans began to wonder, where were all the big stars? Sure, Booker T was still the WCW champion at that point, but the people watching knew that there were far bigger names out there, and they wanted to see them show up too.
Unbelievable.
How disappointed they would be then when it quickly became clear that most of these stars weren't coming. This being as a result of the fact that many of them had guaranteed contracts with WCW's former parent company Time Warner, which saw them be able to sit at home and make millions without ever having to risk their bodies stepping in the ring. And of course, with this realization dawning, much of the wind was taken out of the Angle's sails as people were now forced to lower their expectations about what was ahead.
Oh no.
That's not to say there weren't some big names, of course, as well as Booker T. Diamond Dallas Page would come along. Sadly, though, these were outliers, and even they were often treated like little more than inferior jobbers, with DDP in particular being saddled with an awful stalker storyline that saw him become a mere annoyance to The Undertaker rather than be portrayed as the former WCW champion that he was. Yes, the message was clear already. WCW just couldn't match up to WWE when it came to talent, something Vince McMahon was keen to let everybody know as quickly as possible. The only problem with that was, who would care about watching a one-sided fight, where the majority of the invading forces side was made up of lower card acts like Chuck Palumbo or Billy Kidman? And people only got more frustrated once they realized that, if Vince had really wanted to, he could have bought out many of the bigger stars' Time Warner contracts, this allowing guys like Goldberg and Hogan to come over sooner, becoming part of the invasion while it still mattered. In the end, however, not wanting to upset his existing pay structure and feeling that he didn't need to spend the additional money to make the Angle successful after he'd invested so much in the XFL earlier that year, the boss pushed on, at one point even trying to have WCW become its own separate brand once again, taking over Raw on Monday nights, while WWE stayed over on SmackDown on Thursdays. Plans for this were ultimately nixed, however, after a disastrous match between Buff Bagwell and Booker T on the July 2nd, 2001 episode of Raw killed the live crowd and left Vince feeling like there just wasn't enough juice left in the brand to be a viable force with their own 2-hour show every week. Instead then, looking to salvage the already faltering storyline, he would add something extreme into the mix when, the next week on Raw, ECW would interject themselves with the likes of Paul Heyman, the Dudley Boys, Taz, Justin Credible, Rhino, and Raven, all abandoning WWE at that point and joining up with the incoming Rob Van Dam and Tommy Dreamer to announce that they were the real threat to be worried about in this ongoing war.
That sounds good,
And so, putting their differences aside for one night, WWE and WCW would team up and fend off the third party at the close of that show, only for things to end in a swerve when it was revealed that WCW and ECW had in fact joined forces, with them now going by the name of the Alliance as they set about teaming up to rid the world of WWE once and for all. Of course, the behind-the-scenes reason for this was that by now, McMahon realized that his southern competitor didn't have enough star power alone to compete with his company, and so felt that, by having both promotions unite, it would finally create a credible threat. Sadly though, this new threat would be immediately undercut when it was revealed that Stephanie McMahon, not Paul Heyman, would be playing the role of ECW's new owner going forward, this causing fans to groan as it became clear that the whole thing was turning into yet another McMahon family drama storyline.
Oh no.
And it wasn't helped that, rather than try to have the Alliance pick up some big wins during this period, creating a real threat out of them, the boss just couldn't put his ego aside and present his team as anything approaching inferior. Yes, while the Alliance had some great talents, there was no one being pushed on the level of someone like Steve Austin, who by this point was in the middle of his much maligned but highly underrated heel period where he'd been acting as an unstable fanboy to Vince McMahon, often begging for his approval while also dealing with the odd couple team he had formed with Kurt Angle. And eventually, it would be this instability that would see Austin do the unthinkable as, at the Invasion pay-per-view on July 22nd of that year, the show that would see both sides meet in the ring for the first time and would be main evented by the inaugural Brawl, a match featuring Austin, Angle, The Undertaker, Chris Jericho, and Kane on one side of the ring, while Booker T, DDP, Rhino, and the Dudleys sat on the other. The Rattlesnake would switch sides, turning on WWE, as he from there defected over to the Alliance, instantly becoming their top player in the process, all while continuing to hold WWE's top prize. But if McMahon thought this was going to solve the problem of star power, he was very wrong, as while WCW and ECW's alliance now had a real main event force behind them, it effectively meant that the Invaders were being led by an established WWE guy, someone who had a long history of hating WCW, with this making them look even worse than they had before, as they weren't able to get the job done without someone from the other side. Sticking with the story, however, the boss fired back by bringing The Rock back into the fold 8 days later, setting him up as the new team captain of WWE from there going forward, all while he was booking his guy Kurt Angle to take on Booker T for the WCW World title. And Angle would even end up beating Booker when that match took place, this dealing a blow to the Invaders as he became their top champion for a time, evening things out as, at that point, Austin was still the WWE champion too. And while Booker would end up regaining the gold soon thereafter, he would ultimately lose it again, this time to the Great One himself at August 19th's SummerSlam.
Final boss.
Aside from the main event though, the war between WWE and the Alliance would continue to spread throughout the entire company, with some of the more memorable moments here seeing Rob Van Dam and Jeff Hardy fight for high-flying dominance, the Brothers of Destruction become unified tag team champions, Shane Helms morph into the Hurricane, and over in the women's division, Stacy Keibler and Tori Wilson be introduced to a new audience via their feud with Trish Stratus and Lita. Still though, despite these relative high points and WCW picking up some wins here and there, it was largely WWE who continued to be portrayed as the dominating force, something that went even further when, at September 23rd's Unforgiven pay-per-view, The Rock would not only regain the WCW title in a handicap match with Booker T and Shane McMahon, but Kurt Angle would finally topple the Rattlesnake to become the WWE champion too. In fairness though, a large part of the reason for the latter move was that the match happened only weeks after 9/11, with WWE at this time feeling like they needed to give fans a big babyface win from an American hero to end that show. And this was certainly understandable as, for the next few weeks, Angle was able to help America heal by leading them as their WWE champion. In the end though, the story would return back to its original track come the time of the next pay-per-view event at October 21st's No Mercy, where Austin would get both his win and his title back, all while elsewhere, WWE's forces were beginning to crumble, as The Rock and Chris Jericho found themselves battling each other over the WCW title, with Y2J actually winning the belt that night, this being the first world title of his career. And after that, things would only get worse for Team WWE as, with Rob Van Dam fast becoming the breakout star of the whole angle and now finding himself in main event feuds alongside the Rattlesnake and Kurt Angle, he threatened to overshadow the entirety of the WWE roster, something which in storyline, McMahon most certainly didn't want. As well as this, the boss would also lose one of his key warriors around this time when the Olympic hero himself decided to jump to WCW, doing so on the October 29th episode of Raw, and leaving WWE shattered and broken as a result. Following on from this then, Vince would announce that it was time the whole invasion came to an end once and for all, as he'd booked a winner-take-all match for that November Survivor Series that would see 5 members of each team take on each other in a 10-man elimination tag match, with the loser going out of business for good and the winner reaping all the spoils.
I bet this was such
and so on that night it ended up being Team WWE led by The Rock, Chris Jericho, The Undertaker, Kane, and The Big Show taking on Team Alliance, featuring Stone Cold Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, Booker T, Rob Van Dam, and Shane McMahon.
Ooh,
of course, you can
name.
probably see the immediate problem here is that by this point, the only members of Team Alliance who weren't WWE guys were Booker T and Van Dam. This showing just how poorly the Invaders had been treated by then. And as if there was any doubt left, by the end, it would be Team WWE who would come out on top after Angle had revealed himself to be a double agent the whole time, destroying the Alliance from within, as he ended up costing the Rattlesnake the final pinfall to The Rock that night.
Reverse
And so, like that, the invasion was over, as fans, now out of the heat of the moment, were fully able to realize just how much of a disappointment the whole thing had been. Yes, none of the dream matches had happened, and almost none of the big stars had come in. This wasn't the WWE versus WCW storyline they dreamed of. No, this had ended up being just another McMahon vanity project that revolved around one family and their roster of stars above all else. As well as this, it felt like there had been little interest in actually making any real new stars out of the Alliance members, with only a few like RVD and Booker T managing to fall through the cracks, while other assumed surefire hits like Diamond Dallas Page went by the wayside. And to rub salt in the wound even more, the very next night on Raw, after banishing his children from the building, Vince McMahon would be interrupted by Mr. WCW himself, Ric Flair, returning to the company right after the angle had ended to start a new storyline that would see him become co-owner of the company for a time. Why couldn't the Nature Boy have been brought in before this so as to help what should have been the biggest angle in the industry's history? That remains a mystery. Pushing away from the failure of the whole thing for now, though, WWE instead focused on integrating what WCW and ECW members they wanted to keep into the roster in the weeks that followed, all while they simultaneously began unifying all of the belts. This ultimately ending with the crowning of the first ever undisputed world champion at the following month's Vengeance pay-per-view, where Chris Jericho would surprise many by earning the accolade.
It was so difficult for him to come.
But of course, fans didn't really care about any of that. They just wanted to know how such a surefire hit storyline had managed to flop so badly. Sure, there were a scattering of big-time WWE
you had
stars
such good names. You would never expect this to fail, right? Like, I don't understand. Why would it fail? Why did it fail?
Whole thing due to injury, names like Triple H, Chris Benoit, and Shawn Michaels. But that shouldn't have stopped it from working. No, it all seemed like this was so easy. All they had to do was shell out the extra money to bring in someone like Goldberg, Sting, or the NWO.
Exactly. Like,
and if money was a worry, it shouldn't have been. Because had they done this, they likely would have made it back tenfold, given how high the buy rates for that initial Invasion pay-per-view were without any of these names even being there. Of course, in the years that followed, all of these guys would eventually come in. This making it hurt that much more for fans who'd wanted it back in 2001. Yes, the NWO would inject WWE with a lethal dose of poison in February of 2002. This leading to the true dream match between Hulk Hogan and The Rock at WrestleMania 18, and a year after that, and Goldberg would make his debut with WWE 2, ultimately coming one day too late to have that long-awaited showdown with Steve Austin, as the Rattlesnake would have retired the night prior at WrestleMania 19. After that, and the other remaining names such as Rey Mysterio and Scott Steiner would gradually funnel in as well. Hell, it took over a decade, but even Sting would finally arrive in 2014, albeit far too past his prime at that point to have his dream bout with The Undertaker. That said, most of these guys would be woefully mistreated in WWE when they did finally show up, likely due to the stigma Vince McMahon had placed on them for being a part of the enemy back in the 90s. It's a sad reality for sure, but it is reality nonetheless, and because of this, the whole thing was never going to work. Still, that wasn't to say there weren't some silver linings that came out of the whole thing. Kurt Angle became a top-level babyface, and as previously mentioned, Rob Van Dam was the breakout superstar of the whole thing. His unique in-ring style quickly catching on with audiences so much that he became one of the few babyfaces on the Alliance side. As well as this, Booker T would get to be established as a star in waiting, all while the ECW brand would maintain its aura enough to the point that it would get another full-blown revival a few years later. So yes, while it's easy to focus on the negatives and the what might have beens, let's end the video by instead looking at the good that came out of the invasion instead. Because while no one would exactly call it a success, it still represented maybe the last point when pro wrestling was able to capture the mainstream audience in such a way as to have them tuning in and week out, wondering what the hell was going to happen next and who might appear at the end of the show to surprise them. Of course, part of this was that the world was still living in the dying fumes of the Attitude Era, but another part was that at the time, wrestling still felt fun in a way that it wouldn't again for almost 2 decades, not until the point that the Wednesday Night Wars would become the new big talking point in the industry. So, for that reason alone, we're glad the invasion happened, because getting to see WWE versus WCW, even if it was not in its best form, was still one of the coolest crossovers in wrestling history. And chances are, we'll never see anything like it again. That is, unless Shane McMahon shocks us all over again with a surprise appearance on Dynamite, but we'll believe that one when we see it. Well, guys, what did you think of the video?
I would like to see something like that between AEW and WWE. Is it just me? Like, it's such a formula that can be used very well. Oh my God, but you have to use huge names. And you have to use names with history in both companies. Like, for example, The Edge, Drew McIntyre, Cody Rhodes. Like, I don't know. I definitely do think that there is potential in bringing something similar nowadays as well. Unpopular opinion, I love the Invasion era. Stephanie was so hot during this era. Oh my God. Okay, like, we're talking about that. Oh wow, but then Todd says once Stephanie McMahon came out as the boss of ECW, you knew this was dead in the water. I don't know if it's because she's a woman. I don't know if you have something against a woman being the boss, especially back in the day. But yeah, I mean, we would like to see Becky Lynch, the man, being a boss. I think she would do a great job. 10 years ago, I rewatched the Invasion storyline, and it's still one of my favorite storylines, but I understand why people were so critical of it. Like, it definitely has an amazing idea. Maybe the performance wasn't the best, or maybe that they didn't use their biggest names when people expected to see their biggest names there. I don't know what the company was. I don't know if Vince McMahon ever addressed that and said why he did it the way he did it. But yeah, the execution was not there, I guess. Although the idea was cool. But that is it, guys. That's what I now know about WWF versus the Alliance and the Invasion era. After the Attitude Era, and I guess after that, I don't know what comes after that. Let me know what era comes after that, because I feel like I might call it the dead era. Because, like, literally people are saying so many of you have relived the old times of when WWE was fun for them, and they say, like, I have stopped watching or almost stopped watching WWE until I saw your reactions, and now I'm back into it, and this is a great time to get back into WWE with Triple H as a manager and doing amazing moves with the company itself. And finally, they are reliving something that they have been missing for a decade or so. And I want to know why, because I wasn't there. I didn't follow and I have no idea what's going on, but I'm really grateful and happy to see that people kind of like relive these eras with me, and like, well, I'm trying to learn about it and see it for the first time. It's for them like a nostalgia or a trip down memory lane. Like, it's really fun. Thank you though. Thank you for saying stuff like that in the comments. But that is it, guys, for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more, and see you tomorrow with a brand new video. Bye!